which I think pretty much it already is a priority for all businesses today. The cost of power has gone up significantly. It has an impact on your bottom line, so we want to give you an alternative that gives you a different view on how things work. So I'll start by just introducing who we've got here today. Obviously myself, I'm Matthew van der Linden, founder and director of Flow Power, and we also have...
Hi, I'm David Evans. I'm the Commissioner and Engineering Director for Flow Power.
And I'm Meryl Gray. I'm the Senior Customer Engagement Manager with Flow Power.
Okay. So just very briefly, we're aiming to run the session for about 45 minutes. It'll be about half hour for the presentation and 15 minutes for questions. So if you have any questions, you can type them into the little area at the on the base of your screen there, and we'll try to work through as many of those as we can at the end of the presentation. And obviously at the end of this process, we'll also send out the slides and a recording, so you can go through it in a bit more detail at a later date. So Flow Power, we're a licensed electricity retailer. Our goal is to focus very much on wholesale energy in the Australian electricity market. So what does that mean? Well, that basically means what we aim to do is all the same tools your current retailer uses to buy your energy, we aim to make those same tools available to you, the end user. So that's everything from access to the spot market, which many people are familiar with, to financial derivatives, to large-scale renewable generations as well with corporate PPAs. So all the same tools that a typical retailer already uses to buy your power, that our goal is to make them straight through to you, which gives you a lot of new opportunities and new options to buy your power. So today we're going to focus on the electricity derivatives. We're going to look at the Australian power market and where it comes from. We're going to look at how we lock in that price certainty. We'll look at some of the tools we can provide for that. We'll look at financial hedges and how they actually work. And we'll talk about what we do next. So the Australian power market. There are many types of hedges in the market. We've sold through the market, and I guess probably the main thing I'd point out would be the electricity market in terms of this particular part of the market. It's very mature. It's been in place for a very long time. It's been used by the electricity market as a whole for a very, very long time. So this is not really a new idea or a new industry. It has been there for a very long time. So our goal is to try and make that very straightforward for you guys to use and to take advantage of. So trading within the electricity market, there are a couple of mechanisms that we can use. Now, the main one that we'd encourage you to go look at, because it's very public, is the ASX futures there. So you can see there we've got the address there. You can jump online at any time and have a look at that, https asxenergy.com.au. And on that particular site, you'll see what the actual price of energy has been traded in the futures market. There is also another market there that's called over-the-counter, which many people would be familiar with as well, but it's largely a reflection of the ASX futures. Sometimes in that market you get a bit more flexibility on what can be bought and sold. At the end of the day, though, I guess it's probably important to understand these markets exist, that our product is very much focused on wrapping all that up and providing it through to you very simply. So you don't need to get on the ASX futures market and trade. We'll do all that for you. And basically we try to remove that middleman, so fixed contract market, you don't need to do that anymore, basically. It's much more straightforward. So it's probably a really important point is that everyone, well, you're already buying essentially from the wholesale market. Everyone's aware of the spot market, but it's not like, sometimes people get worried about buying from the spot market or from the futures market because they think they might lose their house on it. Well, it's not like that in the ASX futures market or the Australian electricity market. If you were to go onto the spot market ever since it started, you would have paid less than what you've paid on contract. So the ASX futures market and the fixed contract market that you're all very used to is a reflection of the underlying price of the market. The biggest difference is the spot market is that it is very variable and prices can go up for short periods. So, 1 month you could pay the equivalent of 3 months of power, but often 6 months later you're back to where you started. So the ASX futures market steps in and provides that, I guess you might call it almost like a cash flow mechanism in the market that smooths out that price and reduces the risk. And if you use it properly, you can actually get a very long way ahead. But the important point to remember is that you're already pretty much on the wholesale market. So everyone that's experienced the massive price rises in the recent history, it's because the wholesale market's gone up. So it's not that scary when you put it in that perspective. It's just a little bit different. So just to give you a little bit of background to that, what we've got here is the current prices of the market that we've recently seen. Now you've got to remember that the futures market is that. It's looking at the next quarter's price of what the energy is going to be. So there's someone sitting there saying, well, I think the price is going to be, well, let's look at Victoria. So at the start of Victoria, someone said, I think the price across the next quarter is going to be around 16 cents a kilowatt hour. So they go out and the futures reflects that. Now, when the quarter gets to the end, the actual price came out at like closer to 10, so significantly lower. They obviously overestimated the price. And then we've got a third bar on that Victorian example of 5. So that's actually showing us a real case example of what an actual customer paid when they managed all these tools that we're going to present to you today really, really well. So if they managed the wholesale market well, they managed their corporate PPAs and they managed their load, and they actually managed to come out at 5 cents. The biggest issue I have when I explain that to people is people don't really believe us, because it is actually that low. And so this really does provide a real solid alternative to what you've only ever seen before, being the ASX, but being the fixed contract market.
I think a key point also, Matthew, there is that the fixed contract market has built into it an amount of volatility or premium that is essentially paid for by the market, whether or not it occurs. So what you're seeing in that chart there is what the market was forecasting and expecting the market to do, when in actual fact the market came out a lot lower in Q1, being generally the most expensive period in the market. So in essence, it's worthwhile understanding, or certainly taking note, that when you are looking at a fixed price, you are taking into account a forecast amount of volatility or risk premium that you pay for, regardless of whether that happens or not in the market.
Thanks, David. Yeah, so it really is quite a dramatic outcome in terms of what you can achieve in this market. It's really quite an amazing difference between the lows and the highs and the benefits that can be achieved.
Right. Well, thank you, Matthew. So given that Matthew's just explained the potential benefits of accessing the wholesale market, I'd like to talk a little bit about how you might go about it, how we work with our customers to deliver that to them. So the two important things are to really understand the price certainty requirements that the customer has and how they use power. It ranges very significantly across our customer base, and we really need to understand in great detail, and very data intense. We basically look at your load profiles and understand what they are, and look at putting tools together that will assist you to manage your business. So essentially, when we're talking about control of your business and how you use your load, there's always the aspect of physical control, physical curtailment, load shedding, and whether that's high-tech through controllers that you have in your business, or whether that's as simple as having protocols where people will switch off pumps or take a certain action. That is always an option that you have for your business to physically manage your electricity consumption. Where we come in, accessing the wholesale market and putting in financial hedges, that also delivers control. It allows you to, based on the price certainty that you're looking for, to select through a range of different hedging options, which we'll go into more detail in a moment, what sort of price certainty you're looking for, and we'll go into the detail of what's possible. Thirdly, there's also the option of renewables. Now, renewables essentially lock in a certain amount of supply at a certain price. So they too will give you price certainty and protect you around the volatility in any volatility in the spot market. So a couple of case studies here around businesses. One is a winery, which has very intense power usage in the summer, and another one is a manufacturer with reasonably flat load. So what we would recommend for the two different businesses who have different loads and potentially different price certainty requirements over different periods would be different. And I guess that's what the next section will go into, is what the sorts of tools are that we would work with our customers.
Okay, thanks, Meryl. Great intro there. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the actual tools and the mechanics of how they work. So the first one we're going to start with is a product called the average rate option. Now, this is effectively a tool that allows customers to buy from the spot market, but essentially provides a cap or a ceiling, as we like to call it, on the maximum average price that they'll pay in the market. So it's a form of protection for a customer looking to access the spot market. I guess first and foremost, the question is why access the spot market? Well, as Matthew previously alluded to, there can potentially be enormous value in accessing the wholesale market, but obviously having a strategy to manage when the market is high or prices are higher than expected is important. So the average rate option is a tool that is probably not well known amongst customers, but is used quite commonly by retailers and very large users. This particular tool allows you to set a ceiling on the maximum average price you pay in the market, but any price under that is essentially paid by the customer. In other words, any spot price below that ceiling is enjoyed by the customer. So to give you an example of how that looks, just skip the next slide. Again, if we look at what actually occurred, this is a New South Wales chart here, what actually happened in the market over the last 4 quarters. The black line is actually the published ASX energy or fixed rate contracts published the month prior to the start of each quarter. So it shows you there what from Q1 this year right through to Q3 last year, so Q2. And essentially you can see the red line or the dotted line is what the spot price actually did. And the green line there is actually showing what that outcome would have been with an ARO. Now the ARO, there's a premium payable for that tool, which is a small premium relative to the cost of the contract, which provides that protection. So when you add on the cost of the premium of the ARO, the outcome would have been the green line there. So again, this is a very effective tool for a customer to get access to the spot market, but protect them against any adverse market conditions. And it's also one that can be blended with other tools. It provides some additional benefit from physical curtailment if a customer wants to participate in demand response. This tool will allow them to benefit from doing so.
So with that one there, I guess the main thing with an ARO is that it really provides you with the ability to access the upside of the market that can exist sometimes, and exists most quarters actually, and it's huge potentially, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. As the chart Matthew provided earlier shows that the gap between the forward pricing of the market and what their spot market actually did. So this tool effectively allows you to capture that. Had the market gone the opposite way, the ARO would have capped the maximum average price of the spot. So now I'm going to talk about a swap. And some of you will be familiar with the term swap, and it's essentially that. It's an energy swap. It swaps the floating spot price for a fixed price. So this is an effective way of a customer locking in or price certainty or getting a fixed price outcome for their consumption. And it's a tool that's used very commonly by retailers to provide fixed rate contracts. Essentially, another way to think about it is like buying a block of power, a fixed volume at a fixed price of energy. And that volume or that fixed block of power essentially is sized or selected to cover the majority of your consumption. So that you effectively have, as the diagram shows there on the right, blocks that are selected to cover your peak and off-peak, or if you're a generally flat consumption profile, you would potentially look at a flat swap rather than a peak and off-peak. So again, this is an effective tool to give you price certainty, and these options, or these contracts can be traded in quarters or annually. They can be purchased in advance, and there's a slight variance on this, which I'll talk about shortly.
So just very briefly, one of the key things with a swap is it's probably closest to what a contract, what a fixed price contract is, but it's still actually far superior to that as well, because you're not, you're actually still encouraged to load control if you can. And if you can do load control even under a fixed swap, you get your fixed price contract, but you also benefit from that ability to load control. And that can be a massive advantage to your outcome as well.
Yeah, good point, Matthew. This tool is all about providing a high degree of price certainty, and typically customer outcomes would be within less than 2 or 3% of the actual price they've selected, or the contract price. So very, very high degree of price certainty, but there's a massive opportunity there for a customer to curtail or demand respond, which they would be paid for, whereas you wouldn't see any benefit through a normal contract. So great point. Thank you. The next variant of the swap is called a swaption. And a swaption is simply an option or the right to buy an electricity contract or a swap at a period in the future. So what does that really mean? It's essentially saying, well, if I have a view of the market, I'm concerned that prices in the future could be cheaper than what the market is currently pricing them. For example, a customer looking to contract next year in calendar year 19 might be looking at the market, and they might see that currently prices are around 10 cents a kilowatt hour. So a swaption would allow you to lock in that price, or the right to buy at 10 cents a kilowatt hour. And then as we get closer to calendar 19, the market may shift. The market could be higher or lower than that price. So if we look at the example where the market is higher, say in this case I've used a number of 13.4 cents, you would simply exercise that option, or the right to buy the contract at 10 cents. So you would have effectively locked in a 10 cent contract in a market that's currently trading at 13.4, hence providing significant value. If the opposite occurred and the market was lower at the time prior to the start of calendar year 19, let's say 8.2 cents, in this case you would simply not exercise the option, or the swaption I should say, and you would buy at the lower market price. Why is this particular strategy really important? Because it gives you the best of both worlds. It allows you to effectively hedge your bets against the market. So if they're in a market which has a high degree of uncertainty, a customer would generally want to make sure they're buying at the best rate they can. Now, what this will do is allow you to lock in a price that you know, worst case, that's the price you're going to be paying for your electricity contract, but still gives you the option to benefit if the market is lower and protect you if the market is higher. So it's a really effective strategy in terms of managing risk or price risk in the market.
Yeah, and it's a really big one, because it's like we demonstrated with the ARO, that ability to still keep access or make it possible for you to take advantage of the upside of the market. With the ARO is a really powerful tool, and that's what the swaption brings in. But usually the swaption, probably a key point there, is they're usually used obviously a lot further out. So you might buy Cal 19 and Cal 20 on the swaption. So the ARO is often used over shorter term. So you get the upside with either strategy, and that's a really important aspect of what we're talking about, and still protecting yourself against the downside.
Yeah, exactly. So the table there just simply summarises the key advantages of the swaption are a high degree of price certainty. You're guaranteed to get the best outcome of the market. You know your price and your cost up front. And if the price is lower in the future, obviously you can access that as well. And it gives you some flexibility around changing the strategy at the time. You do pay a small access fee for the swaption. It's relatively small compared to the actual cost of the contract. but again, for a very high degree of price certainty. The next one I want to touch on, and Meryl briefly mentioned this in the previous slide, was the PPA, or Power Purchase Agreement. Now, we also refer to them as VGAs, or Virtual Generation Agreements, and that's because energy is supplied virtually to the customer through the NEM and via the retailer. So it has a very similar effect to having the generation on site, but except it's supplied virtually from a large-scale project rather than on site. Now, a VGA or a Power Purchase Agreement acts a lot like a hedge. It provides a certain amount of your electricity according to the generation profile, which covers a portion of your load at a fixed price as agreed to by the VGA or the Power Purchase Agreement. So these allow you to lock in long-term price certainty, say 7 to 10 years, and they effectively allow you to benefit from a lower generation price of large-scale renewable solar and wind. They can also be combined with other tools that we've previously discussed to give you price certainty for the balance of your consumption. For example, in the periods outside of solar or wind, hedge contracts can be used to give you price certainty. They can be combined with physical curtailment, or things like AROs, or also purchasing, again, swaptions. So there's a high degree of flexibility in how you manage that balance of supply. But again, the PPA itself, or the VGA, is acting like a effective hedge against your consumption, giving you a fixed price outcome for the period of generation.
Yeah, so that example I gave earlier was the key bit there, where we showed a 5-cent outcome. It was a combination of using this VGA, the hedging strategy, and load curtailment, and it had an amazing outcome for that customer.
Yeah, it's an extremely powerful strategy when combined with physical demand response, or physical curtailment, because effectively allows you to cover a certain portion of your load by the generation, and for the portion that isn't covered, if you're able to use things like demand response, you can effectively manage your spot exposure or your spot pricing through load control. So very, very powerful strategy.
And just to contribute there, David, obviously one of the advantages of the VGA offer that Flow Power has is that it can combine different technologies, so it can be solar as well as wind, and they are very powerful. They can mean that there's significant load coverage to get that lower cost benefit as well.
Okay, so now I just want to talk about an actual example or actual retrospective outcome for a group of customers with Flow Power, and this is in Q1 Victoria. So what we did is retrospectively look back at what the outcomes were based on the strategy that they could have applied. So this particular group of customers used a combination of spot purchasing or with physical curtailment, and also some financial hedges. So the actual outcome in the market was about 9.73 cents average across a group of customers at a market that was priced at around 14 odd cents. So I think that they came up with a significantly better outcome for Q1 compared to what they would have paid under a fixed price scenario. Now, sorry, that number was 12.7 cents. It's actually just listed down below under financial hedges. So the base price for Q1 in Victoria was 12.77 cents prior to the start of that quarter. You can see under the line item financial hedges there a slight discount of 4%, and that's because this particular strategy, the customer would have had a slight blend of spot as well as the physical hedge. So they would have come out slightly better than the actual market price. Now, obviously, physical curtailment gave a significant discount to that through load curtailment. And again, there were 2 events in Victoria on the 18th and 19th of January, relatively short duration, which contributed to a massive 27% saving. Had the customer taken an average rate option, their numbers would have been around 21%. So still a very, very good outcome, and that's without curtailment. And also the renewable, we looked back and said, well, if that group of customers had been supplied by the Ararat wind farm, what would their outcome have been? And again, a very low number of around 5%, so around a 50% saving compared to the market. So these are just some real examples of what the actual outcomes were for this particular group of customers under the Q1 scenario.
I really just wanted to make the point that working with customers, it's a combination of these things. So we work with customers in terms of what suits them best. So a combination of physical load management, the financial hedges, or renewables, and give a total package that is customised, is specific to their circumstances. This all brings it together. That is, it's not necessarily one or two. It's a combination of all these things that we bring and offer.
Yeah, that's very true, and I think it's probably worth saying that this is not just to achieve 1 or 2 percentage advantage points, because it's a bit more complicated. There's a bit more involved. You need to take an interest in it. You can't just sign a contract and do nothing for 3 years. You do need to be a bit more involved. But when you're talking about 49% saving, I think a lot of people are going to be involved and be interested. So I think we're drawing to the end. So what we'll do is I'll just start to try and go through some of these questions that have come up, and we will try to get through as many as we can. So just give me a moment just to go through these. Cost of a swaption. David, do you know what that is?
Yeah, typically, anywhere from a couple of bucks, generally we'd find, or even less than $1 per megawatt hour, and that would be based on a contract, a swaption price, or what we call a strike price, which is not too far from the contract that's offered. Say, for example, if you can currently buy a contract at Cal 19, let's say round numbers 10 cents, and you might select a swaption on that at 10.2 or 10.3 cents, so very, very slightly out of the money. You might be looking at a few bucks a megawatt hour to effectively lock in that. So not a significant cost given the potential upside of that strategy. Again, the further you go out of the higher the prices than the current market that's been offered, the cheaper that premium is.
Yeah. So as you go to Cal 20, it might end up being $4 or something. Just to put that in perspective for those used to cents per kilowatt hour, that's 0.4 cents a kilowatt hour. So when you're talking a price of 7 cents a kilowatt hour, it's a cost, but it's not, by comparison to where the market can move, it's not that big a cost really. So what is the best time of year to take a financial hedge? There you go, David. Do you know this?
The answer is probably when you need to, shortly, but ideally there are certain times in the market which are generally cheaper, or contracts are generally cheaper than others. So, for example, coming into the summer period may not necessarily be an ideal time to be looking at contracts, and last year was a very good example of that, where we saw a lot of premium priced into the market, and that fall away very quickly at the start of January. So there is some strategy there, and our job is to guide our customers through this around when they look to purchase these contracts to represent the best value in the market. It's actually a very good point when you consider that customers often sign retail contracts at a particular point in time and effectively locking in a high or low price. Could be locking in a lot of premium unnecessarily. So the timing is a factor, but essentially it's all about getting the right strategy in place for the customer in terms of the price certainty and the outcomes they're looking for.
So another question would be the actual price variation that a customer could expect to see, say, over a 3-year contract. So if the market is known at, say it's at 7 cents over the next 3 years, what do you think a reasonable variation might be to the price they might see over that period?
Well, again, depending on what strategy you actually use, if you're looking at something like swaps, you could lock in a very, very high degree of price certainty. So depending on your load profile and the types of strategy that's selected, it could be within, say, 1 or 2% of the actual price. So you could have very, very high price certainty. But if a customer has a desire to get access to potentially lower market pricing should it occur, then you would be looking at something like an ARO and a swaption strategy, which gives you obviously some price certainty looking forward, but an opportunity to pick up some value in the market as and when the market is lower.
Okay. Another question we've got here is, what's the difference between a wind VGA and a solar VGA? So I'll let David answer that one again, because he's so good at it.
Thanks, Matthew. So essentially, you know, in terms of contract, there is no difference. They do the same thing. Obviously, the generation source is the key here. So one is produced from a large-scale solar farm in your state, and the other is produced from a large-scale wind farm. And so the important thing to also consider is that two can be blended, and we frequently do blend or recommend blending both wind and solar for a customer to get a better coverage and certainly provide in some greater redundancy into the generation source and more coverage. So wind has quite a different profile to solar, and often you find by selecting the right solar and wind combination, you can have quite complementary profiles, which provide obviously a better profile fit for a specific customer. But again, it is specific to the profile or consumption profile of the customer, and some will be suited more so towards solar and some will be more so towards wind. But certainly using a combination can be helpful. But contractually, they're exactly the same.
Okay, there's another question come through here. I think we've still got a bit more time. How can we integrate financial hedges with demand response? So I can start that one and you can jump in if I don't get it quite right, David. But it actually integrates superbly. In fact, demand response outside of a wholesale strategy actually doesn't make a lot of sense, because you need to be able to respond to that price signal that's occurring in the spot market, which is really what makes demand response work. So you can still be on, like we said before, on a swap contract or even an average rate contract under a wholesale strategy. And if you manage your load during periods of, say, high price, which is essentially what, you know, when demand response usually occurs, you can get all the advantage that comes from that, and that is a price of, you know, $13 a kilowatt hour. You would get paid for those periods where you're reducing load. And in addition to that, you can still, and you're not limited from participating in the in things like the AMO work program. So you can still participate in that. And we had customers. In fact, that 5 cent a kilowatt hour example I gave before was a customer who had all these strategies and did participate in the AMO work program, and they got the full benefit from all those aspects from the market. So it actually is the very logical way to move forward in terms of demand response.
I like to call it the opportunity without any obligation. So when you have financial hedges in place, you have an opportunity to participate in demand response, but absolutely no requirement to do so. So it can be a really great way for a customer who wants to potentially expand or explore some demand response benefits in their organisation, but may have some considerations or concerns around whether or not they can do that. So where there's a financial hedge in place, that's obviously giving you the protection first and foremost. So it's covering you against any market outcomes. Should you participate voluntarily in any demand response, as Matthew alluded to, you would essentially be paid for that through the curtailment process, and obviously quite considerable benefit is attainable through that.
Yes, that's right. So another question that's come through is can I see the prices of these contracts? And most definitely you can. I think we touched on that earlier. The ASX Futures website is the place to go have a look and browse around, try to understand it. We're very happy to take your calls to help you walk through it. So all that information is there and completely available and completely transparent. It's actually a key part of the message for today. And probably the other thing to also mention is you don't need to. It's all there, but we can help you through the process of understanding what is there. When we actually do the trades, that's actually what we're trading from. So
I just would add, one of the questions that we often get is how do I get started in terms of working with Flow Power? And what we typically do is we'll talk with the customer about what they're trying to achieve and what it is that they're looking for. We'll need to access 30-minute interval data for a 12-month period, and that will allow us to essentially put to the customer a proposal which sets out by load, by hedging option, what could potentially be an outcome for their business. And then we'll work through a discussion on that. What we may actually need to do is do combinations of the options that we've put forward, and that may require us to actually show sort of past performance of the market, or look at what independent studies say the market's going to do into the future. So there is a sort of in-depth discussion and a working with our customers around what's right for them, and bringing them along so that we can then work to put in a contract that suits their requirements.
Yep, that's all. And I guess probably a key message is it's not difficult. It's very straightforward. You just give us a call and we can start to look at it. What's the best tools for a seasonal business? David?
That's an easy one. Demand response would primarily be the most valuable tool that a seasonal customer may have available, in that if they have any ability to shift or manage load in response to price, there can be significant benefits and upsides for that customer. Now, obviously, there may be situations where they don't have flexibility at particular times of the year, and we can look at other strategies that we've discussed previously that would obviously provide a degree of price certainty, or the amount of price certainty that they want. But a seasonal load is a very interesting one, and that often seasonal loads tend to be predominantly peak summer loads. So those customers may often pay a premium in the market because of most of their risk is in the Q1 period and Q4, which is the most expensive period in the market. Using this type of wholesale strategy, you can generally get the lowest possible outcome in those periods below what would you normally see from a fixed rate contract.
Okay, thanks, David and Meryl. Unfortunately, we've sort of run out of time, so we're going to have to leave the rest of the questions there, and we'll try to come back to those that have asked questions to see if we can answer them directly. So for the moment, we'll wrap it up, but please don't hesitate to give us a call at any time. We can take you through these strategies in more detail. Just remember, it's not that complicated. It's relatively straightforward, but it is new, so there's a bit of a process for you to learn a little bit more. But like I said at the beginning, the benefits are huge. They're significant and they're worth your time. So give us a call and we can take you through what's next. So thank you very much for joining us today.